do you know your neighbor, and how often do you find yourself talking to them and interacting in meaningful ways? Do you know them to a point where you can depend on them? If you can ask favors, if you need something little, like a bit more butter for a recipe, or something a bit bigger, like, can you watch my kid? Can you help me find my kid, right? If your answer is like, I don't know, or something along those lines, that's okay, because it's not your fault that you don't know your neighbor necessarily. While there is individual responsibility within everyone, there are also systems and factors outside of us exist that can make it harder for us to know and want to get to know the people around us. Because it's just a fact that we don't know our neighbors as well as we used to. We used to rely on our communities, the village, for survival and upbringing. But nowadays in America, it feels as if we're also disconnected from one another. And it seems to be a part of because people have this feeling as though they don't have to know their neighbors, they don't need to. They feel it's no longer necessary for their survival. And I completely disagree with this notion, because I believe that we need to know our community and care for one another for our well-being and survival of not only ourselves, but the collective. I am here to convince you today to get you involved in your community, to know your neighbor, and practice mutual aid, because, after all, it's going to take a village. The loss of community in America is a nuanced topic, and it's not caused, I can't point my finger at just one thing. There are parts to it. There are things that exist in America, like our society's individualistic culture, where we prioritize individuals over the collective. There's been a loss and lack of third places, which ties directly into the systemic restructuring of cities, where it is physically harder because of city layouts to interact with people and meet and just congregate, because there are less and less areas where people can exist without having to pay or be accused of loitering. When a society adopts an individualistic mindset, there are certain side effects to it. And it basically means we prioritize the individual over the greater good, over the collective, which goes directly against the purpose of mutual aid, because mutual aid, in simple terms, is the cooperation for the sake of good, like the common good, right? Greater good. And there are systemic causes and just systems in place in America that push people down. So when we have these individualistic mindsets, we blame ourselves, we blame each other, we don't blame the systems that are in play, the factors outside of ourselves, to explain how people get there. And in 2018, there was a study done at Harvard by some researchers where they took data from the US Census to try and find a correlation between people's life stories and their current income. And they found a really strong connection between the place someone's born and their future income. They used this data to make a map called the Opportunity Atlas, which shows the median incomes of people born in each zip code, and it was able to predict their outcomes and their incomes and what they would be in the future, and it was found to be scarily accurate. And this data just goes to show that no matter how hard you work sometimes, you can't break out of the systems that are in place, and this is why we need to rely on each other, because with this kind of information we can help uplift one another, especially those who are not favored by the systems that have been beat down, because this individualistic mindset and placing blame on individuals is not a realistic worldview. And in times of need, people rely on each other. And I think a really good example of this is during natural disasters or even war. Currently, overseas in Palestine, there is a teenager who has been supplying mutual aid for displaced people in his vicinity, and his name is Youssef Abu Hatab. And he is currently in Gaza raising money to distribute food to his fellow Palestinians, even though he himself has been displaced. This is a really good example of mutual aid being put into action in a time of crisis, because when disaster strikes, we need to band together with those closest in proximity to us to ensure survival of the collective. So by getting to know the people around you, you can build relationships with them that are going to make this distribution and mutual aid in crisis more efficient and effective. This example illuminates a timeless truth that humans will come together in solidarity as a powerful force when facing adversity. This reliance on each other during crisis helps raise important questions about how our societies are structured and how we can strengthen our bonds that hold us together even when we are in times of relative peace and not under crisis. These connections are still important. A way that we can start to build a sense of community locally is by getting to know your neighbors. Introduce yourself. Because your neighbor is going to be your closest line of support in a crisis, in a natural disaster, in an economic crisis, whatever. They are physically within your proximity. And there are certain areas I recognize in America where it's going to be more difficult to get everyone gathered together. But I saw this really lovely video from TEDx where this lady, Shania Graham, shows a lovely example of getting to know your neighbors and creating a community. In this video, she threw a street party and got people together to collectively paint something, and this little event ended up getting her to allow her to know a lot of her neighbors and people, and it just blossomed from there. They ended up having they had a community garden, and stuff like that is so important because it helps cultivate relevant and practical skills that can help feed members of the community. And having that kind of community built up around you in proximity to you is so important, especially for people that have been shunned by the systems, because they don't need to feel shunned by their community and people within proximity. And I know this sounds like it can be really inconvenient and I don't have enough time and da-da-da, but it gets easier. It's not always convenient to build community and get to know people, but it's essential. Mutual aid and community building is essential for survival and thriving. I am currently trying to implement these practices into my life, and I found a small group of students that help feed the homeless in our area and provide them with clothes and other needs, and just interacting and building community with these people. It's so important, and I think a good way for people to start small is get to know your neighbor, introduce yourself, invite them to something, host a street party, an event if you can, especially one that focuses on collaboration. And if you feel as though you are not part of a village or that you've lost your village, you can always start it again and you can build one with the people around you. Thank you.